Gary Gallus, I'd like you to welcome you to the Laissez Faire Club's author interviews, and congratulations on your new book.
Well, it's nice to have a new book out with such a good subject, and I can thank you for encouraging me.
Well, I got a chance this week to read through the whole thing, and I ended it with a massive amounts of respect for the subject matter, which is the life and work of Leonard Read. That's what
this stuff started back in 1990. Pardon?
No, that's it. Go ahead.
This stuff actually started in 1999 when I was trying to use a famous quote from George Washington, and I couldn't remember it exactly. I looked it up in some quotation books, and it wasn't there. It was the one about, forces like fire.
Yeah.
So I said, well, where about? I know I've seen it. Well, the Orange County Register back then used to send me tear sheets, right? And in the end of it would be one quote each day from, the guy who started the paper. And I would often cut them out and set them aside, and they ended up in my desk. So I looked through my desk, and I found this pile of things I had cut out from the Orange County Register, including 5 copies of the George Washington quote. But then I looked at them, and I started looking, and a lot of them were not in any of the famous quote books. So I said, well, I actually put together an op-ed in 1999 from things that the Orange County Register had, but weren't available in any quote book. And that got me started doing research. Let me go track down some of these famous Liberty quotations. I started with the Founding Fathers and famous people, but around 2007, I saw a reference to Leonard Read, and I said, wait, I read some of his stuff when I was in college. Let me go look and see what he has. So I went over to the library here that had 2 of his books, started reading. I was impressed. I started working on that stuff, and I decided to read all the rest, including, I'm proud to say, one you didn't even know existed.
Well, how many books did he write?
Well, some people say 27 and some people say 29. And I think it's where do you draw the line between a pamphlet and a book?
Yeah.
And I think some people thought some were small enough, they're only pamphlets, others weren't, and they called them books. So
yeah.
I've seen 2 sources. The one I think should be most definitive said 27.
Yeah.
Wikipedia said 29.
In a way, I wondered if maybe part of the reason that his work has been lost is that he wrote, in a sense, too much.
Oh, he did. And he's actually kind of hard to read when you sit down to read through it, right? Because there's so much stuff and the themes are so common that you sort of get it lost. So you have to sort of do it in bits and pieces. It's really better to do it the way he has a quote from Burke that he liked. To read without thinking is to eat without digesting. And so the best way to read it is really one article at a time. Think about it if you thought there was something there. I mean, it's really not designed to go straight through. I did it because, I was, on the trail of doing that stuff. But you really are impressed if you read carefully through there. In fact, I still think I only looked at the sustained arguments that he made. I didn't look at a lot of the short one-liners. He has some of the greatest one-liners that aren't in the book. That, at some point I'd like to just go through and say, here are his great, when you want a good quote about liberty, and you can find it just from him.
Yeah.
So maybe the next edition.
Yeah. Well, he was good with language. It's one of the many things I noticed from reading your book is that he tried to find new ways to express old ideas.
Oh, he did. Whether it was the candle example that he used to do that you mentioned in your intro, or I like this one, the fist, right? He used the analogy, well, what can you do with a fist? Well, you can't write, you can't compose, you can't play music, you can't shake hands, you can't do anything creative. Well, that fist is the only thing the government can do. I can use force to make you do what I want. Well, so the question becomes, what do we need more fists for in society? And that answers pretty few things.
That's interesting. Yeah. And even he even avoids overuse of words like state and government. He likes to experiment with new ways of expressing things, the bureaucracy and the political power and the ruling class. And he has all these kind of large vocabulary of expression, all of which is designed to draw attention to his major theme, which is the creativity and productivity of human freedom, right?
Yeah, I think Skype didn't come from government. I mean, I don't think Al Gore invented Skype.
Yeah.
But, I agree with that. When you see what makes society worth living in, it's the creativity that turned the resources that we had the same as, the cavemen, if you want to call it that. Right? What happened is knowledge applied to those things created all sorts of things, and it was all free people making their own choices that did that. So, I was impressed. I sort of shared the opinion that you had, that, when you first read it, it's pretty straightforward and it's simple. But when you start reading the massive amount of stuff and you see these things, he's a very impressive writer. And a guy who didn't go to college, he's largely self-educated, which is, I think, why he had so many quotes. He read so much that he was able to learn from those famous thinkers without the intermediary of the education getting in the way. I think by taking the teachers out of that system, he learned a lot more than if the teachers had been there.
One thing I didn't know until this week was that Leonard Read actually began his professional life not as the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Los Angeles, but as a wholesale grocer in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah, who failed at that eventually.
Who failed, yeah. Which, I guess he would say that failing is a success in a market because it gives you information, right?
Well, he wasn't averse to hard work. When his dad died when he was young, and so he worked huge hours. I mean, the willingness to work overwhelms virtually everything else if you're on the right track. And he really had the willingness to work and to learn. And, it was touch and go, the economic experience he had for a lot of time.
Well, but it's a very interesting thing to me because in a way he probably gained more from that experience in real commerce than many people gain from just sitting behind in a desk and listening to a professor most of their lives.
Well, he also had the advantage being in business and, in the Chamber of Commerce of hearing what businessmen say. So he would say, don't look to businessmen to defend freedom. Because businessmen like some freedoms, the ones that make them more money,
right,
but they're more than happy to restrict others. So he had a really good insight into businessmen aren't necessarily heroes. They're more than willing to manipulate the system if it works too, right? It's freedom that's the key. It's not looking to business. It's not the people who are engaged in business that are the key. It's the people who understand the role of freedom.
He also seemed to get that there are many people who have a profound fear of freedom, and he almost wrote sometimes like a counselor, to try to help people overcome that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, one of his titles is "Trust Yourself, Other People Do." Right? The people who are afraid of freedom, he basically says, you got to realize, you just don't trust yourself. I trust you more than you trust you. I'm willing to give you freedom, right? So, learn as much as I do. So it's true. He really did say there's nothing to fear here, right? It's just that demon. They say, well, you can't. That couldn't happen. You can't point to what's really going to happen. But he had, as you said at one point, this faith. I believe that free people who can't coerce one another can only find ways to do things better. And that's the most striking thing. Over and over again, and he lived it, right? He wouldn't coerce anybody, right? And so one of the things he emphasized was integrity. It's one thing to say I believe in freedom, and 90% of the time to do it and then go restrict it here and here and here. But what he did is he lived 100% I believe in freedom. And so he really was that word he liked to use a lot, the exemplar. He was an exemplar of what happens when you really believe in freedom.
I was thinking that maybe his view is slightly different from what you might get from other libertarian-oriented writers who regard the state as a unique evil. It almost seems like Leonard Read saw the state as a kind of institutionalization and embodiment and bureaucratization of an evil that already exists.
Well, it's an evil that exists in us. He always said the government is fix what you want. Or in one of the articles in there, the two sins that I think are the key to bad government. Thou shalt not covet, and thou shalt not steal. If we did covet and we weren't willing to steal as long as we could cover it over by saying it's the wonders of democracy, the problems of government wouldn't exist. So he always said, don't try to fix government. Fix yourself, right? That self-improvement stuff. Yeah. Fix yourself, and only by demanding things that are consistent with freedom can you ever have a government that's more consistent with freedom.
Yeah.
So he really did that. And, that kind of depressed me at first. because I talked to my public policy classes for years, and I tell them that story. I thought I thought it up. The 2 commandments. Don't covet, don't steal. Well, apparently he's beat me to it. I didn't know I stole it from him without knowing.
Yeah. In many ways, if you read carefully, you get a lot of the thinking of Mises and of Hayek, don't you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, because he to read people. And he was influenced by Mises, and he was influenced by Henry Hazlitt. You know, the people who were at FEE, especially when most of the official academia was basically busily rejecting him. So he was able to use those insights. I mean, he quotes Hayek a lot in the various books. You know, he quotes Mises and that sort of thing. So, yes, he was somebody who didn't have a college education with Keynesian training to get in the way of understanding the insights that are really there. Because a lot of people struggle with, you know, Mises, Hayek, the Austrian view. And in some ways, if you've gone to college, it gets harder. Because if you took a macro class and you didn't take it from me, you would have got a lot of Keynesian orthodoxy, right? So you have to get through all that stupidity to get to the insights. And I think because he was working, he read these people. I mean, this was a guy who, to clarify his thoughts, once he was sort of converted to this idea of liberty, he studies, he reads, he goes out and finds those people that give him insights, and he would incorporate it. When you do that without prejudice, I think you end up in much more Austrian views than if you do it any other way.
Yeah. Now, he was writing at a difficult time. He was writing kind of, well, in the whole post-war period, right? So almost as soon as FEE was founded, which was in 1946.
1946.
So you have,
fact, you know, it was the inspiration for Hayek to found the Mont Pelerin Society in 47.
Yeah.
You know, you needed an international group to do the same sorts of things he was doing.
Yeah, I'm not sure I knew that either. And that's, to me, again, interesting to see that, you know, here's a man who started his life as a wholesale grocer, learned so much from that experience, got curious about economics, went to Chamber of Commerce, founded FEE, and then became an inspiration to the Mont Pelerin Society, which in turn influenced the whole world, and so on and so on. It's amazing.
It's the granddaddy of all these libertarian think tanks, and you know how much it cost him? They offered him back then over $300,000 a year at the Chamber of Commerce, and he turned it down to found FEE. Adjusted for inflation, in effect, they were offering him a couple $1 million a year, and he said no to go found something he was going to give away. That's confidence in freedom.
And he did give a lot of way. I mean, all the work, all the stuff that he published at FEE, he encouraged people to reprint, didn't he?
Yeah, as long as, I think you just had to say this was from FEE. I think the only reason they ever copyrighted it was so that somebody else couldn't take his stuff and copyright it in their name.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's how I read it when I was a kid. I mean, whether it was the Freeman or whether it was things that came across my path in pamphlets or whatever, it was available to me as a college student because it was free. If I would have had to pay for those things, I wouldn't have known what to look for or what to expect. But I read things I wouldn't have read otherwise.
Well, that's so visionary too, because this was long before anybody was talking about publishing Creative Commons or, you know, that sort of thing. Now, he wrote during the Cold War, but he never really joined the Cold War cause.
Well, I think there's too much of the Cold Warriors who would say, we have to do whatever it takes to beat the evil Russians, even if what it takes is to adopt the same kind of organizational approach, you know, coercion and so forth to beat them. And I think that probably kept him away. And he didn't write that much about international policy in terms of the Cold War. He wrote about voluntary trade creates wealth, you know, all the things we do to restrict it and so forth. So, you know, I also didn't incorporate much of what he wrote at all in this book because I think for the audience to see what's his general view, a clearer view is what he thought about domestic policy than what he talked about international stuff.
Well, I think you did a great job. I mean, as I was reading through it, I thought I had a sense that I was getting the basic, you know, the core view of Leonard Read and the themes that animated his life. And it also struck me that this man had to really, really love freedom and love liberty to spend his entire life writing that much about it.
Well, you know, I don't write as much as he does, but I have written over 1,000 articles, and I think at least 99% of them are extolling the virtues of liberty, and there is something really faith-based, right? The more you study, the more you pay attention, the more you realize, you know what? This stuff is really even better than I recognize. So, I mean, I've benefited from this study because I have learned better how much I appreciate liberty. As my wife said, in most cultures by now, I've long ago been dead. The things I say aren't exactly endorsements of government or state policy. So, the first ones to get rid of are people like me. So I have benefited from that too.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that I have this real big hope that the work you've done here is going to help bring attention of a new generation to Leonard Read's writings. I mean, there's a few old timers around, who knew him, and
I wish I was one of them.
Yeah, I agree. But there's a danger, I think, that that as time goes on, that some of these writings get lost, and
especially just before the internet boom. When it was all print, it wasn't saved. It was meant to get people to get started reading this stuff. And so I think what happened is it was before everything was easily accessible online and indexed online and that stuff. So he was doing it before that. And I think what happened is having happened just before that, they sort of got lost because they weren't new, right? They were doing all this stuff, whatever was new. Well, old stuff took a long time to say, well, maybe we should incorporate that too. So I think this should have, and if somebody would have been paying closer attention, somebody other than me would have done this. But He was very rewarding.
Well, there's a certain humility too to what he did. He did work to draw attention of his readers to other thinkers too, didn't he? I mean, he was always citing Hayek. And
so much that, the last two chapters in the book are just the two most frequently cited people. You get an idea of what he liked. One of the chapters is Edmund Burke. He even mentions in one of his books that if Burke was alive today, he'd invite him to join the board of fee. And, his idea, I think we mentioned this earlier, where he said one of the things he would quote from Burke, to read without thinking is like eating without digesting. Right? And so it's like he would read those people and he would think about it and he would incorporate it and it would bounce off these other things. He cited so many people. I have actually found people he cited that I'd never heard of and been interested enough to go track down other things these guys said. So, I mean, he was very inspirational. He looked at those sorts of things. He cited all sorts of people. And, he even, one of his books was like a daily reader of famous quotes. So he went through all the zillions of quotes he had, and he picked one for each day of the year. And, there were quotes in there that he found particularly interesting, and it was a hardback. I mean, he thought it was important enough to make it as a hardback book that they sold for that.
This was in the 1950s, 1960s?
That book, I think, was in the late 70s. I mean, this was after he had written a lot of stuff, and he had so many of these quotes, and people would tease him. Why do you cite everybody? And his answer was, I don't have all the wisdom, right? I see this guy is doing something. Well, let's take what he has to offer, right? That's what freedom does. You pick whoever has the best ideas and you go and cherry pick them and you give them credit, hoping not only that they read what you wrote, well, go back and read what Bastiat wrote, because he was very involved in the early reprinting of the law, the early reprinting of those other Bastiat things. He recognized a well-made argument. And in fact, I see that more and more in my classes. Econ textbooks and classes are often so focused on getting onto some formal model, they skip right past the careful thinking at the beginning. Or as I tell my students, okay, let's say there's 7 important incentive stories that Jeff Tucker faces, and I see 5 of them. I missed 2 of them. All the math on earth, setting marginal everything equal to marginal everything else, doesn't guarantee that any of the answers are right. Because if the 2 I missed are important, all the answers, which look so scientific, are going to be wrong. And he said, let's do the first step right. Think carefully. I mean, think of the Keynesian stuff today. Somehow this money just comes out of nowhere, and we get credit for spending it, but we don't ask where did it come from. We don't ask what the part is to draw great advantage of economics. And I think he was that way because he wasn't primarily interested in economics. He was primarily interested in moral philosophy. But if moral philosophy is thou shalt not steal, you get to be a pretty darn good economist by coming out of moral philosophy, and you own yourself. What are the consequences of those things? Which is what Adam Smith did. He was a professor of moral philosophy. I think we need more moral philosophy than instead of less. Yeah. And he really worked on this language. And you hear when you read about like some of his obituaries, he would be there pounding away at his typewriter all the time. And he is so full of ideas. He kept his journal every day for over 10,000 days. And he basically, those ideas, he would write them down, he'd think about them, he'd work on them. I know how hard it is to edit before there was the computer for all the easy editing thing. Can you imagine? You type at it, and then you edit it, you type it again. I think, wow, he was dedicated.
Yeah.
And he really added a lot of things. Although he also was an adventurous cook, apparently. I mean, he'd have people over for something, some sort of chicken asparagus. I think I wouldn't want to eat that, but I'd give it a try if he did it.
I like that you included his essay about where he says that people who love freedom need to be careful to not make predictions about what the market will do. Like how would we deliver mail if we didn't have the post office? And he has this thing. Well, I think the right answer to that is we don't know, and that's part of the beauty of freedom is it discovers things we don't know.
Well, it's true that, in fact, he treated it as a trap. The key here is what happens is when somebody who is a statist, to use whatever shorthand word you want to use, says, "Oh, what would you do instead?" Well, the fact is that same person could not have answered the question when you asked him at the beginning, "What would you do?" Right? And yet something happened. So this idea is that you have to avoid that trap and rely instead on, look at the billions of wonderful success stories of people working in freedom there are. Right? There's a zillion. They're all over the place. Well, why can't you have faith that whatever will arise through voluntary arrangements is going to be better? And he had that faith. And this is one of the things where he talked, one of his most famous, most commonly used quotes was the bloom pre-exists in the seed.
Yeah.
Where people were always talking about we can achieve some moral good, supposedly, by evil means. And he said you can't. The use of evil means by itself disqualifies the result from being moral. Right? So those things where I am going to violate those principles of liberty to get what I want, right? That's just out the door. You cannot do that. So he really said that's a trap. Yeah. You can't answer the question. And if you do, they'll say, well, if that's all that's going to happen, that's not so great. Because we can't even imagine what it's going to be. Or he would do the comparison. Well, you talked about mail. Well, people say, well, how are you going to deliver the mail? Well, he says, okay, well, let's think of electronic communication. Over the last century, what has happened to the cost of mail, the reliability of mail, and what has happened to the telephone, telegraph, and so forth, and that has just continued since then. Well, the ones happened because it was controlled by government, and one happened because it wasn't. Right? So we would draw a huge parallel of how much difference there was when in that same example. You say, well, let's look at the post office. Well, what does the post office do? They deliver communications. What does online do? It delivers communication. Well, which has grown and created more things and worked better over that time? Yeah. Right? Any place you actually look seriously, voluntary arrangement always looks better.
Yeah, yeah. There's another reason it seems to me that we have a lot to learn from him. He spent his whole life arguing, or in a debate, basically. I'm not sure he would call it a debate, but in a discussion about the idea of liberty. So he had a lot of experience with interlocutors and understanding the way they think, right?
Yeah. Well, he did, even on planes. People would ask him what he thought on airplanes, and he would engage it. But one of the things that's nice that many modern libertarians don't do, we are often full of feeling superior. Mm-hmm, right? Mm-hmm. We have figured it out, and you haven't. And instead of looking to learn more or grow, we're looking to fix others, which is the problem that he says. It's like you cannot try to fix others. So he treated others much more respectfully than I know I do, at least in some of my private conversations. But I mean, he says, it's sort of like what Mises said. You're not going to argue somebody out of their preferences. So what you do is take their preferences as given and treat them seriously. You want to help the poor. The only hope for reducing disagreements here is I can show you that what you said you care about is not advanced by the statist policy, then maybe you have a chance to convince them. Right? Focus on what actually happens, but take what they say seriously, And that's really a struggle often for us, to take what they say seriously when we know there's so many problems with it. Where we'd say, if I had to fix that sentence, it would take me a month.
Right. Well, Gary, thank you for all the work you've done. I mean, in a way, you've done more than just put together a wonderful book, but you've rescued a legacy, I think, and I have very high hopes for the distribution of this book and what it's going to mean for the next generation. I'm personally very excited about it because I learned a lot from it that I didn't know, and I feel like, others tackling this book will start getting serious about their Leonard Read too, and as a result, be better conversationalists and better thinkers and.
There is the problem that a lot of it is dated in terms of the specific example. So that's why I edit it, to make it somewhat shorter and delete things that wouldn't do it. But if you seriously pick one of those books, read one of the chapters, find the book it's from. Go look it up in the library or online at the Mises site, where you can still find them online, and read the book. And you will be amazed that there is insight in every single book. Sometimes the books are all these little pithy one-liners almost, that you could line up together and have a great opinion piece.
Yeah.
Other times they're more extended. I only picked the more extended arguments because I didn't have space to pick everyone. But I do think at some point I'd like to sit down and go through the ones that weren't included and basically pick out, here's what I think are his best quotes on liberty, freedom, those things. Because if people would actually go there when they're writing a high school paper or something, somebody to quote, they would find stuff worth looking at. I mean, even the books I didn't like very well, because maybe they weren't about the things I found interesting, or maybe they were more about Cold War stuff. But take time to digest it. I think that's the key.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. And I'm going to get this interview out. We release tomorrow. So tomorrow's the big day.
I look forward to the lifestyles of the rich and famous.
Okay.
Wait, why are you laughing at that?
No, it's going to happen. Let me just say, I don't know, as Leonard Read would say. I don't know.
What's going to happen? Okay, well, take care, Jeff.
Okay, bye-bye,
Talk
Gary.
to you later.